We are learning the Maimer on the essence of Chasidus. We're on page 29, chapter 3. Torah, the epitome of perfection. Let's go. What was said earlier, in regard to this Torah of Chasidus, the Torah Hasidis means the study, not just the study, the philosophy of Chasidus, the world of Chasidus, or in English, Maishira will use the word the ethos, E-T-H-O-S, the ethos of Chasidus, who bichlolus, and look at the word bichlolus on the Hebrew side, is in bold. The Rebbe made the word bold, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Who bichlolus bechol chelkei haTorah. This idea that we said earlier, what idea are we referring to, Moshe? We are referring to the idea that Chasidus is not a composite of Talmud, Halacha, Medrash, and Kabbalah. Wrong. Chasidus is what he called earlier the Or Chodosh, the new light that was revealed through the Baal Shem Tov at the time, which is a singular idea, from which it brings inspiration into every other part of Torah. And this is very interesting, Velvel, because Chasidus came after Talmud, after Halacha, after Pirkei Avos, after Kabbalah, and nevertheless, the Rebbe writes here that it was infused with this Or Chodosh, with this new energy, that it is capable, and what it does is it brings a new life into a piece of Talmud. And if we can understand this and it resonates with us as we work to understand it, what makes sense is that there's no comparison between a chassid who learns a piece of Gemara and a non-chassid. Both are learning the same Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Brachos and Arvei Pesachim. Both are learning the same halacha. But if you find a real chassid, if I were a rich man, diddle-diddle, 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 if we become a real chassid, which is our life's work, right? And then you learn a piece of Gemara, and you compare your Gemara learning to the way you were before you were a chassid, no comparison. Now, that doesn't mean to say that before you became a chassid and you learned a piece of Gemara, you didn't understand the Gemara well. In fact, maybe you understood the Gemara better. The barometer for learning a piece of Gemara with the infusion of Chasidus is not how well you know the text, how many questions you can ask on the text, and how many answers you can give, and how you reconcile contradictions in the Rambam and the Rif and the Rosh and everything else. No. So when I told you last week the story with my Rosh Hashiva Rabbi Shochat, and I repeated it this Yom Tov, I was in Kvanites for Shavuos, and it was a 3-day Yom Tov by us, and I had plenty of time to pontificate and hakachainik in different shuls that they asked me to speak here, there. And I shared the same story where Rabbi Aaron Kotler, the Rosh Hashiva of Lakewood, asks Rabbi Shochat, where are you going to be for Shavuos? And he says, he knew he was a Lubavitcher. He says in 770 by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So he says, yes, but Torah is in Lakewood. And this is not Pesach, and this is not Sukkot. This is Shavuos, the festival of Torah, Yonason. So for the festival of Torah, Matan Torah, where should a student be? In Lakewood, in Mir, in Ponovich, in Slobodka. And Rabbi Shochat with a straight face says, dear Rosh Hashiva, you're right. Torah is in Lakewood, but Maishira is in 770. I just gave you a year's worth of thought. That's Chasidus. And I'm not saying it in with the sharp edge. I don't mean that. When you learn Chasidus and you understand what the Baal Shem Tov accomplished, there is the Torah of Lakewood, and there's no question about it. It's a powerful Torah. But then there is the Maishira Chasidus, the Baal Shem Tov, who teaches you how to truly become one with Torah through Yiras Shamayim. That's Baal Shem Tov. The Rebbe here in this kuntris doesn't say it in such graphic words. He says it on more the intellectual level, which is important. But I'm simplifying it because we need to know the direction. So therefore, let's go back to the text, where he says, Ha'omer li'el, what we said earlier in chapter 2, B'negei Torah Chasidus. And what is that? He doesn't say what that is. What is that? That Chasidus is not a composite, but it's an inyan atzmi. It's an independent issue. Who b'chlolos b'chol chelkei Torah. The Rebbe says we find a similarity of this idea in all parts of Torah. How? HaTorah keileles kol hamini shleimus u'mailas hanimtzois ba'olam. The Torah has all the virtues that are found in the world. Do you hear that? The most innovative idea, from medicine, Velvel, to business, to music, Avram, to art, Moshe, whatever the issue is, it's in the Torah. However, it's bechlalut. Last night I heard a part of a conversation between Jonathan Sachs and Dennis Prager, and Jonathan Sachs is talking about Beethoven's Second Symphony. I must say I'm not versed in Beethoven, and maybe Avram is, but it sounded very interesting, right? Guess what? If you know Torah, not if you know the pshat, if Torah resonates in you, you can find that beauty of Beethoven's symphony and his movements and everything else that's inspirational in a piece of Gemara, in a piece of Hasidis, in a piece of Musar, in a piece of Halacha. But you need to find it. And how do you find it? You need to have open eyes. The Rebbe says, right? Effen die Augen, you'll see Mashiach. Open your eyes, you'll see Mashiach. Well, I look outside, I don't see Mashiach. You know why? Because I really haven't opened my eyes. I don't know how to open my eyes. Oh, who teaches you how to open your eyes? Your Rebbe, your Baal Shem Tov. He teaches you how to open your eyes. So Isser, going to a Rebbe is not about he's a smart man, he's a bright man. No, you don't need a Rebbe for that. For that, you go to Isser, a doctor, Velvel's a doctor, Moshe's this, Eliezer this, Hillel's this, I'm this. Each one of us. You go to a Rebbe because he's a soul geologist. He understands a diamond, and the diamond is the Neshama. And there aren't many people who understand the Neshama, and better said, who relate to the Neshama. It's not here, it's not even in here, it's deep inside called soul. So, the Rebbe says here, back to the text, HaTorah keileles kol hamini shleimus u'mailas hanimtzois ba'olam. The Torah Kedosha, the Holy Torah, has within itself all types of virtues that are found in the world under the Torah. Next paragraph, brackets, in the brackets. Hanechlokis b'chlal, that can be divided, generally speaking, b'inyanei ha'olam koten hu adam, in the microcosm of man. What would they be divided into? L'mailas hamoichin, the virtue of intellect, u'mailas hamidos, and the virtue of character. Generally, how do we characterize people? Yonason. We characterize people, oh, this one is so bright, he knows so much, he's so intelligent. The other person, what a mensch. What a Baal Midos. So Seichel and Midos are two categories, Avram, that categorize all, generally speaking, all virtues of humanity. Next paragraph. Bahanogas musoriyois umidos toivos, when it comes to the latter, moral behavior and good character, hare hamishpotim v'darche amusa shebetoira, the dictates and ethical instruction within Torah, and in the parentheses, where do we find that? In our beautiful Pirkei Avos, the Masechtas Avos Ukedoimem, and similar like Hilchos Deos and the Rambam, etc. Heim Tachlis HaToiva Emes. They are the ultimate of good and emes. You know what the Rambam writes? Teach non-Jews the 7 universal laws. How should you teach them? 1 second. Why should you teach them? Because they're obligated to fulfill those 7 universal laws. Says the Rambam that when you teach the 7 universal laws, you have to teach them that you know why you shouldn't murder and have a court system, not because it makes sense, which it does, but because God said to Moshe on Har Sinai, I want you not to murder, and I want you to have a court system. Why is that relevant? Why does the Rambam write that? And the answer is what we're reading right here. That Torah is the source of everything, not logic. Logic and good character and all that are very good things and very important, but they're not an end all. They're a means to an end. What is the end all? Torah. And even lahavdil for a non-Jew, it's Torah, vis-a-vis the 7 universal laws. Says the Rambam, educate them in the 7 universal laws, but they must know, why shouldn't you murder? Because God said so. And if you teach them that and they learn it and understand it and accept it, even when they'll want to murder because they think it's right, or they'll want to steal, etc., they'll say, well, I think I should do it this way. I feel I should do it this way. But God Almighty, my Creator, thinks otherwise and says otherwise, and I follow God. And if you don't teach them that, they're missing the ikar. They're missing the foundation. Continue inside now. And all other systems of morality, which men by themselves have contrived, not from Pirkei Avos, mixed together, good and evil, mureves hein toivara, emes v'sheker, a mixture of good and bad, truth and lies. V'chelkei hatoiv sheyeshnem b'chol achas me'ashitis mikoidem hu b'Torah. You know, a lie cannot stand on its own feet. You know what the Gemara says? Isser, you learned Gemara. What's the lashon in the Gemara? I'm testing you now.
I don't know the lashon in Aramaic, but it needs a kernel of truth.
And the Gemara's lashon is, come on, chevre, sheker ein loy raglayim. Sheker doesn't have feet. What does it mean? Doesn't have feet? What a lie doesn't have feet. You understand? It means to say that in order for sheker, a lie, to be sustained, it needs an iota of truth mixed in. And that's the way most lies are. It's not a complete, 1 second, you understand? It's not a complete lie. It's a 99.9% lie. And there's 1 little percent, 1 little drop of truth there. And that gives it feet. Yes, you understand?
Yeah, you're talking about feet. Yeah. the Rebbe Magash did the word sheker, shin kufay. Kufi is like a 1 foot, and racing 1 foot. So you're right, they do have feet, but they only have 1 feet.
1 foot.
You can't stand on 1 feet, you gotta fall.
It rests on a point.
Yeah, very good, thank you.
The shin is flat.
Right,
But no, it rests on a point. Depends how you write it.
right.
It rests on the point.
Since we mentioned feet, I have to tell you a story. It's not directly related, but I shared it at a Fabrengen in a shul in Crown Heights 2 days ago. We're talking about this idea of the Maishira Rabbeinu. That Torah is in Lakewood, but Moshe Rabbeinu is in 770. So I told him, the story is cute, the vert is cute, but it obligates us. There's no free rides in Chabad. There's no free rides with the Baal Shem Tov. You want to be a Baal Shem Tov Chassid? You want to be a Chabad Chassid? You want to be a Chassid? You better work. If you ain't working, you got to find another club. There's no free-for-alls here. So, this Chassid goes into the Rebbe, who was rather close to the Rebbe, and he says, Rebbe, I have a problem. I need parnosa, a bracha for parnosa. I have a family. The Rebbe says, there is someone who you know called Mendel the Soldat. Soldat is the Yiddish word for soldier. Mendel der Soldat, Mendel the Soldier. I knew Mendel the Soldat. I spent countless hours speaking with him in his older age in Miami. And he was in the Lubavitch Yeshiva in 770 in 1941. And he told me the day someone walked in who he did not know who he was, and it was during Mincha, before, after, during, he had a big Gemara and he was looking into the Gemara. And he went over to the senior Mashpir of Shmuel of Witten and he said, who's that? And Reb Shmuel said, that is the younger son-in-law of the Rebbe, of the previous Rebbe. And he just arrived from war-torn Europe. He was saved from the Nazis, Mach Shemom, and he's here. That's him. And he told me, I watched him. And I saw already in 1941 that this is a special person, just the way he stood during Mincha and looked into a siddur and then looked into the Gemara. So the Rebbe told this chassid who was asking for a bracha for parnasa to ask Mendel the Soldat what to do to make a better living. You know, he didn't have the chutzpah to say, Rebbe, I came to you. I have plenty of friends I can go to. I'm asking a tzaddik. He didn't say anything. He goes out of Chasidus and he catches Mendel the Soldat and he says, Mendel, the Rebbe sent me to you to ask you for advice. How can I make more panosa? And Mendel said, go into the shoe business. People need shoes. Everyone has feet. Baruch Hashem, you know. We need shoes. Men, women, children. It's a good business, I think, for you. You'll make a nice parnasa. He looks at Mendel and he says, Mendel, I don't know about the shoe business. I don't care about the shoe business. I don't want to be in the shoe business. Leave me alone. Sorry, you asked me my opinion. I'm telling you to go into the shoe business. You'll make good business. He goes back to the Rebbe and he tells the Rebbe, Mendel told me to go into the shoe business, but I don't know it. I don't care for it. I don't want it. And Rebbe, it's not for me. Please give me a bracha for something else. Or, give me a bracha. I don't know the rest of the story except one thing, that the person, the rest of his life, struggled for parnasa. And worse. And I'm not going to say more. Other issues. When you ask a Rebbe a question, be ready to listen, because if you don't, you're playing with fire. And it's better not to ask. There were Hasidim of the Rebbe Rashab and the Rebbe Marash that decided to come to America at the turn of the century, the 20th century, and everyone knew at the time that all the tzaddikim and all the gedolim and all the rabbanim, what was their opinion? America is treif. Velvel, you heard the expression, the treife Medina, the non-kosher country. It's America. You go to America and shortly after, if not you, your kids leave. And guess what? It happened. It happened to most, to the best. The fathers came with long beards and the kids left. And we've spoken about that a lot, so let's not repeat it. So here, some Hasidim decide they're coming to America. The pogroms were terrible in Russia. But they knew if they went to the Rebbe and asked, he would tell them not to go. So guess what? Some of them would not ask. They just asked for a bracha. They notified the Rebbe, I'm going to America. Please bless my trip. Generally, a Rebbe, you ask a bracha, he'll give you a bracha. But that's not asking a question. That's telling the Rebbe what you're doing. And, if that's where we're at, and I understand it wholeheartedly, and I'm not pointing fingers, and who am I and who are we to point fingers? But the fact is, there's a difference between asking a Rebbe and telling a Rebbe. So when we speak about shoes and the story, he asked the Rebbe for advice and help with Parnasa, and the Rebbe gave him an answer, and he did not listen. You're on your own. And I'm not saying because of that he was punished. I'm not. It sounds that way, I will admit. But I'm saying is that you're taking things into your own hands. And when you take things in your own hands, either you're connected and it's going to go, or you're not connected and it ain't going to go. Or maybe it'll go sometimes. But when you have the schus of the tzaddik behind you, and the tzaddik's wavelength is clear, unadulterated, and when you jump on that bandwagon by becoming that tzaddik's chosid and living with his instructions and directives, etc. And by the way, the Arizal writes this. This is before Baal Shem Tov. I can show it to you in the Arizal. Well, the Arizal writes clearly, when someone dedicates themselves b'mesiras nefesh to a tzaddik, the Arizal says they will be impregnated spiritually with energy, with the neshama of a tzaddik. How long that'll last is a different question, a different story, but for a while it'll be there, and they accomplish tremendous things because they're following in the derech of that tzaddik. That says in the Arizal. So you take that Arizal a few hundred years later, Baal Shem Tov, and you come to the concept of Rebbe. But we have to stay to the topic. That was just to be Yoitze the Shvuas Fabrengen with you, Chevra. Okay, let's go back to the text. So, the Rebbe writes here, all Shitas HaMusar, Shebadu B'nei Yodam Milibam, that professors and scholars and self-improvement gurus have come up with, Milibam, are a mixture of good and bad, truth and lies. And the good part that each of these shitos, philosophies, opinions, and approaches have, Mikayram hu b'Torah. That part, their source is in Torah. Okay, there was a story of the previous Rebbe. Listen to this. Once during one of his travels, his vakhu kamu anoshim v'hibiu deos. There was a debate amongst people, and they expressed their opinion. Top of page 31, everyone. Shainos, their different opinions. Oides Yachas HaTorah LaShitos HaMediniyos, regarding the Torah's opinion on political systems, etc. And these people asked the Frierdiker Rebbe, to which opinion do you agree? They were discussing politics, okay? Moshe, is this simple? They were discussing politics. The Frierdiker Rebbe was there, and they say to Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, the tzaddik, the previous Rebbe, to which group do you belong? Every one of these people who were there, they showed a source to their political party and their political leanings. When they asked the previous Rebbe his opinion about this honor, he answered, the Torah, being that it's the absolute. Tachlis Moshe means absolute. It's the absolute truth and goodness. Yeshnam bo kol ha'inyonim ha'tovim. It has within it all good aspects of each of your political systems. Shebechol hashitos. In other words, Avram, they were asking the Rebbe, do you belong to the right? Do you belong to the left? Do you belong to the independent party, right? Do you belong to the Labor or do you belong to the Lakewood, etc.? And the Rebbe said, I don't belong to any, I belong to Torah. And Torah has whatever your particular shita is, it's in the Torah. And that's what I belong to. By the way, this might explain, maybe, I just thought of it. See, it's good that we're learning and I'm talking it out. It came to me now. In 1940-41, after the previous Rebbe came to America, this is recorded, what I'm telling you, by Rabbi Rakefet in his book on Rabbi Eliezer Silver, the chief rabbi of the Union of Orthodox Rabbis in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. He lived there first in Springfield, he was a Rav, and then, of course, in Cincinnati most of his years. Rabbi Silver, the famous Rabbi Silver. So he wrote in a note from the minutes that he asked the previous Rebbe to join the Aguda. Because we all know at that time there was the Mizrahi and the Aguda, and Rabbanim were deciding what party to belong to. You probably have heard that. Rabbi Soloveitchik at the end went with the Mizrahi, and many of the more right-wing, Rosh Hashiva, they went with the Aguda. Rabbi Eliezer Silver knew about the previous Rebbe. They had a very good relationship starting yet from Europe. And he already understood that getting him on the Aguda would be very helpful. And he writes in his note that the previous Rebbe told him, I'm not ready to make a decision. I'm a newcomer to this country. And then subsequently to that, he told him he's not joining any party. Later, there are letters in the Igros Kodesh. I put a lot of this into one of my books. There are letters in the Igros Kodesh where you see where the Rebbe explains his reasoning. And the Rebbe says, Chabad, Lubavitch isn't a political party. And he doesn't want to be perceived that way. Because once you're perceived as a political party, you already are puzzled. You're invalid, meaning to say you already have agenda, preconceived agenda. You're on this side, not on the other side. And the Rebbe says, Chabad, Lubavitch is of the belief that we don't have a party. We belong to Torah. And this is maybe exactly what the Rebbe is saying over here with this story. That these people asked the Rebbe which political party does he believe to be correct, and each one explained their political party and the good things from that party. And the Rebbe said, I don't belong to any of your parties. I belong to Torah. Because Torah has everything that is good. So whatever you and your political parties have that's good, it's all in Torah. Now, it has to be said that over the years, you should know, the Rebbe did not involve himself in what's called politics, especially in Eretz Yisrael with the voting. There was one time, I think in 1989, where because of a particular situation, you have to know the nuances of the political situation at the time, where the Rebbe, they say, I didn't hear this from him directly, so I don't know, but they say that he leaned towards Mizrahi. There was a Rabbi Mizrahi, it was a Lubavitcher, and he was in Knesset, and they said they should vote for Gimel, if you remember, Gimel. That was really an exception to a rule, and it has to do with a much greater issue that was going on at the time. And if you want to understand that more, read my book on Chabad and Panovich, and you have an understanding, I believe, of why that was. We're going to stop here and continue in Mitzvah Shem tomorrow. Any questions? Any comments? Any thoughts?
I always have a comment. I have two comments.
Please.
One regarding your statement that it takes work to be a chassid. So it reminded very much of the Katzker, the story by Katsk, that a chassid went to the Katzker Rebbe, and he said, Rebbe, I need a bracha for Parnassa. He says, the Katzker Rebbe says, no, why don't you daven? And so this chassid says, but I don't know how to daven. And the Katzker says, and you don't even know what to ask for. You should ask me to teach you how to daven. That's one. The other is about,
Thank you. Very good. Thank you. Very good. Yes.
Asking or not asking of a Rebbe. So I had a situation where I was very interested in a certain shir that I was pretty sure my Rebbe would not be masking to. And I decided that for me, I wanted to go to it. So I started to attend it, and after some time, I was moded to the Rebbe. And I told him I started going to the shir. And he gave it to me. He said, you need to work on being a chassid. He says, you should have asked me. I said, Rebbe, I didn't ask you because I knew your answer would be no. And he laughed and he said, that's also an Indian in Chasidus.
That's an Indian in Chasidus that what?
Not to ask, not to ask certain things.
There's certain things that have to come from the self, and that's one of them. Don't expect the Rebbe to tell you you're such a jerk. What kind of chassid are you? You're such a nothing. This is a chassid. You try to go around me. A Rebbe's not going to tell you that. The Kotzker, will say it in a different way, in a very sharp way, like you just said before, and other such statements, like the famous story, the guy dresses up with a shtreimel, and he comes to give shulam to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says, Happy Purim. It's like, come on, get real. You know what I'm saying? But generally, the Rebbes, I'm not talking today for sure, but even the Rebbes of old, going back to the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, that wasn't the general style of most Rebbes. In Chabad, I heard this from Reb Shlomo Karlbach's brother, Reb Eliezer Karlbach. He once farbrained with us in Los Angeles. I'll never forget this. I told you this. I don't want to go. One of my friends was smoking and blowing bubbles, and he called him a fool, a shaita. And he said, we were taught, when he says, when I came to Lubavitch in 1944, and I started to learn Hasidis, and I started to hear farbrengens for the Mashpiyim, who were Talmidim of the Rashab, he said, what was the number one thing that they taught us? Don't be a fool. The worst sin is being a fool. Now, what does that mean? That means there's certain things you gotta use your smarts and come to it yourself. And if a Rebbe has to tell you that, you're a big fool. I'm not directing this at you, Isser, but that, in a sense, is what I believe your Rebbe told you without saying those words.
I said that the Rebbe is an expert. I say an iron fist in a velvet glove.
Oh, yeah. You know, I had a grandfather, Zayd Shlomo, who lived in Tel Aviv first after coming from Romania, and then he came to and lived in Bnei Brak. And in Tel Aviv, I know where he lived, next to my daughter there, next to Ben Yehuda, the ocean over there, in the Dizengoff area, right? And he's literally, he lived on a street called Cholavei Tzion. 15 minutes, you walk over to Achad Ha'am, number 91, is where the Belzer Rebbe, the Holy Tzaddik, Rabbi, lived and had a shul. And we asked, and my father told me that he never took him to have a private audience with the Belzer Rebbe. You're talking about a malach. He had a malach in his backyard. He came in the mid-40s. He passed away in 57. Besides, for the summer, he was in Tel Aviv. In the summer, he went to Yerushalayim. And I think maybe for Tishrei. Part of Tishrei, don't forget. Anyway, so my Zayda said, my Zayda at that time didn't have a beard. And he came from Vision to Hasidim, but he was already of the generation where they didn't have beards in Europe, in Romania. So he said, and he would go to the Vision Rebbe, both in Tel Aviv, the domestic Eliezer, and the Vision Rebbe, the Reb Chaim Meirel in Bnei Brak. And here he wouldn't walk into, and he walked in for a minyan, but to have a one-on-one private audience, he didn't. So my Zayda said, I knew that if the Belzer Rebbe says anything about my beard to me, implying I should grow a beard, and I wasn't ready to grow a beard, the next day I would drop dead. I would die. I didn't follow the Rebbe, and his kpeda, consciously or unconsciously, would take my life. But when I went into the Vishnitzer Rebbe, he would go like this. The word in Yiddish is glet. He would pat his nice hand on my beardless face and say, "You're so wonderful, you're so special, I love you so much." So he said, I wasn't scared to go into him. But to the Belzer, I was scared. He would just look at me and, like, hey, where's your beard? You come from Vision to Hasidim, let your beard grow. And I didn't want a beard. I wouldn't make it the next day. And I'm just saying, there are different things.
Now you have to tell the story of the Satmar Rebbe and Mike Tress.
Satmar Rebbe what?
And Mike Tress. They used to bring Mike Tress to the front of the line, clean shaven, and one of the Hasidim had the chutzpah to ask the Rebbe, who is this clean shaven guy who cuts in front of all the Hasidim? And he said, you're right. When some people go to Shemaim, they're going to say, Reb Yid, where's your beard? And when some people go to Shemaim, they're going to say, Reb Beard, where's your Yid?
Reb Beard, where's your Yid? That's good. That's good. Anyway, Chevra, have a great day. We'll see everyone tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.
Like a bitch.
Take care.